Bom dia a todos e a todas. Eu sou Sandra Goulart Almeida, reitora da UFMG. É com grande satisfação que eu declaro aberta pela primeira vez de forma virtual a 29ª Semana do Conhecimento da UFMG, que este ano tem por tema a inteligência artificial e as travessias nas fronteiras do conhecimento. Eu gostaria de começar.
Knowledge. I'd like to begin thanking the organizers in the persons of Professor Mario, André, and others that have been involved in organizing this week. Each year, it's a different area of the university that takes charge of organizing the Knowledge Week. And this year, it is you who had this challenge of transforming this week into a virtual week. So to all of you in the research department, our heartfelt thanks for the wonderful organization and all the work that you have put into this. Also to thank all the other supporters of this event who are also involved and have activities and will have activities throughout the week. Various departments of the university, as well as others who deal with academic activities. And also CEDECON, which is our communication center, also the CAC that coordinates the community topics, and the nucleus of accessibility and inclusion that has taken part in all these activities, whether face-to-face or virtual. Also our interpreters in sign language. It's very good to have this activity so that we can extend and make accessibility more widespread. So this week it happens in the context of the 27th National Week of Science and Technology in 2020. The topic is also artificial intelligence, the new frontier of science in Brazil. Here at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, we have decided to highlight the topic of crossing the frontiers, understanding that this goes through all areas cross-sectionally, and all of this is very interesting to all of us. And this is the week, the National Week. It's the 17th National Week for this event, and for us it's the 29th week. And this Knowledge Week has happened now for nearly 30 years, so for us it's a great pleasure to have this. So this week is the 29th week of also scientific initiation at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, the 10th seminar of scientific initiation at a junior level, and the 24th event of graduation, 23rd event of other areas, also several other events that are included in this more wider event. Again, it's the 5th seminar of the program for supporting inclusion and accessibility, organized by the Nucleus of Accessibility and Inclusion here at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, and the 3rd meeting of mobility. So there are many activities throughout the week, and Professor Alessandro and myself, we are very much involved in this, and we have the great pleasure of organizing this entire week, even in this context of virtual reality, which is so difficult for all of us, the context of the pandemic. But we've decided that we will continue nevertheless, and to hold this week and to have it working as we have done throughout these years. So this week, it starts under the sign of challenge, how to organize an event in times of a pandemic, how to organize a Knowledge Week in this context that aims not only to show to society and to our own community as well, all that we produce in research and extension and everything that has been done throughout this year and these many years. So how do we provide accessibility to this? How do we inform people about all this work in this challenging context? So we embrace this challenge because we understand that this moment is very important, the moment we're going through right now, a moment for preserving life, which is why we keep our activities remote, and also a time in which we can meet the demands of society and the government in the context of the pandemic, something that the Federal University has done since March, the moment we started to go through this difficult moment. We changed ourselves, we faced the challenge, we changed our labs, and for instance, to meet the demands that the Federal University has in this context. And we've done what we've done for many years, which is to support our society, our state, our country. in every area of knowledge. It is also a moment in which we can provide visibility to the various actions of the Federal University of Minas Gerais and also other public universities to articulate cooperation between various institutions of higher education and various institutions of the government and of companies as well. So it's a time for us to have this dialogue, to work jointly so that we can then carry forward the event. Although the topic is artificial intelligence, the events this year aim to go beyond, to discuss important topics for us at this moment. Of course, how to face the pandemic of COVID and to cooperate in this context is so important that we require cooperation between institutions, the governments, and several spheres of society, the environments of innovation as well. Today is the day of innovation, and this afternoon we'll have a panel debate, including various stakeholders, including companies and the government, to talk about innovation in this context and to talk about artificial intelligence, and also to talk about the pandemic and the challenges. We have to talk about the current challenges of science and technology in Brazil. Tomorrow we'll have a panel, which is very important for us. This will include the presence of the FBBT, ABC, and other such entities, also with Soraya Smart, who represents the Committee of Science and Technology, also legislative powers from the government, to talk about the current challenges. Open science is also a very important topic, the impact on society of our graduate courses. And we will have also several other reflections. So this is a very important moment for all of us. It is a moment in which we will show all the work that we have done, not only in artificial intelligence, but in several other areas of knowledge, and to provide visibility to our own community, to society, and also to make reflections about our present and our future. Universities are important, so they're important heritage for our country, and 95% of research in this country is done in federal universities, in public universities. So this is a very important moment for visibility and understanding of the important role that our institutions have in our country and also for our society and our state. So this is our intention, our proposition, to think about knowledge, to reflect on knowledge throughout this week, to think about all the various intersections that we have, transdisciplinarity and so on. UFMG, the Federal University of Minas Gerais, is a knowledge pole, a knowledge center, and a place for interaction with several other forms of knowledge, working with the interface between teaching, research, extension, outreach, and culture as an articulating element of all of these experiences. Then I'd like to conclude thanking also our speakers today, those that are willing to be with us and to talk to us and to help us reflect and think about these topics about artificial intelligence, looking at it from several perspectives, in this cross-sectional mode. And I'd like to conclude with a sentence from a poem who won the Nobel Prize in 1966. Lislava Szymborska, she talks about knowledge. She says that every knowledge that does not raise new questions will die quickly because it cannot keep up the necessary temperature to maintain life. Of course, she's using a metaphor, but anyway, these metaphors are important because she uses metaphors that are very dear to us at this time. Maintenance of life, the importance of knowledge to keep life and to support life, the importance of knowledge to keep things alive, to keep thinking alive, and to keep things going, to have thinking, effervescence, and all our reflections in all areas of knowledge, which is something so important for us. So with these words, then, myself and Professor Alessandro, who is here with me as well, welcome all of you who are in this virtual room and also seeing us physically. I'd like to welcome all of you, and I wish you an excellent week. And we'll be together here reflecting about this important topic and also about public universities and their role in our country and our society. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And now I yield the floor to Professor Mario Campos, who will chair this meeting and our general coordinator for the week, who will welcome you as well and chair this first panel. We also have, after him, we will have a presentation of our choir, Ars Nova, which is part of the history and the tradition of the Federal University of Minas Gerais. And it will be very good to have you and welcome you here with us, even if it's virtually. So thank you. Stay with us. So please, Professor Mario. Thank you, Professor Sandra. Good morning, all of you, ladies and gentlemen. And like we say in English, to speak after Professor Sandra is a difficult act to follow. So it's very hard to keep it up. But anyway, I'd like to congratulate you, Professor, and to thank you and others for the opportunity that we got of organizing this event, of organizing this 29th week of knowledge, which in fact is around a topic that's very dear to me personally. It's an area in which we have done research, and it's quite a coincidence to happen this week in this context. And also, I'd like to congratulate and welcome our various colleagues from the various departments of the university who have dedicated and given their time to make these events happen. So it's a week that is very full of knowledge and very interesting. And it really went below, this is way beyond our expectations. So I'd like to thank our various colleagues, the students who also worked a lot to help us and to present and to organize their presentations in this new modality, which is the virtual reality, with various other tutors and teachers. You can visit the site of this event, www.ufmg.br/Knowledge Week. So I'd like to thank everyone who took part in organizing this event, and CAC for basically organizing this. It will be a tour de force of presentations like we have seen now. It's the coordination for community actions, DAC, also for cultural actions, that not only helps the event, but also will have other exhibits throughout the week, and who made available to us this fantastic number of the choir Ars Nova. And we also have a special event at the end of the week. So I'd like to thank Tradução. There is an interpreter in the background translating to English and from English into Portuguese. And very especially, I'd like to thank Professor Massancini, our coordinator of research, for unconditional support throughout this week and in the past as well. So very especially, I'd like to thank Professor Ana Maria Neto, our Director of Research, who very competently and very diligently organized the organizing committee of this event. There were several months of planning, of meetings, of interactions with several teams of various areas of the university, and with all of the uncertainties and challenges that arose as a result of the pandemic. An event that is typically face-to-face is now done virtually for the first time. So there are many changes, many challenges, many things having to be implemented here under the coordination of Professor Erner and also the team of the PRQ. And thank you very much in the name of Regina, Wiltner, Patricia, Aud, Sibelas, and others who provided support, what we call the IT of informatics in this sense. So your support also for the webpage, Professor Carlos Basilica and his team, Leandro, Felipe, Wellington, Ana Clara, and others, our support team, Ana Carla, with acquisitions and purchasing, Cristiane, Adiliani, Felipe, Patricia, etc. So I may have omitted someone, I'm sorry, but you know, there are many people. Over 2,500 papers from several areas, and this time they're fully available in the webpage that I've just mentioned. It's a new page with a few novelties, such as the digest, we call it a digest, which is a compendium, and the annals, which are fully digital now. And with a lot of events throughout the week, and synchronous events like this one, and asynchronous events also that are made available for in several ways. So I'd like to ask your license, just to show you a little bit of this website. I will share my screen here with you, just to give you an idea, very briefly. Let's see, I think you can see it. There you go. So this is the website of the Knowledge Week. I won't really use so much of your time, but you can visit it yourself. So we start an introduction, and with the various program, you can find several events here that are shown here throughout the week. You can see it's a very full week, full of talks, and all of them fantastic, with synchronous and asynchronous presentations, all organized by the PRAE DAC. All this is visible to all of you, and you can see this also on a daily basis. Every event that happens every single day, you can see this. And specifically, I'd like you to point you out to the digest, where you can find several papers or presentations if you want to go to specific presentations. So for instance, I can choose, for instance, the 29th week. You can seek by the event itself. It will show you the event in all academic units, or you can choose a unit or a tutor or as it goes. We don't have the physical poster, but we have the virtual poster. So these are two icons. One is a camera where you can see the presentation itself, and on the right you have the poster. So if you click here, I just chose randomly. You'll have a video. Not sure if the audio goes, but anyway, this is a video. And each one of our students produced this video. And so you have this as well. And to the side, you can have access to the poster itself that is presented virtually. So what was before fully face-to-face now is available virtually, as I've just shown you. And obviously, you have the annals as well, where you can, for instance, do a survey. You can put the name of an author or a part of the title or something, and then that gives you access to the various presentations and the papers of these people, of these various professors. So in the annals, you have all of them here available. The digest, as I said, is a more dynamic presentation. The annals are the typical annals, but they are shown virtually. Also, we have other events per various organs of the university. So you have to click on these to find out. These are the various agencies of the institution that have events throughout this week, and also cultural events down here. Some of them are very well prepared, lovely, and they are listed here according to each day of the week, and news as well. So basically, that's what I wanted to show you of the website, and I invite you to visit the website and to see the development of the week as we go along. And it's a different manner, a different form of presenting things, but I think we will be able to do something that will be useful in this next week, which is making available all of this information in this week with this different form of access. Right. So basically that's it. I won't spend any more of your time. We're certainly anxious to start, and I wish you all an excellent week and an excellent event throughout this week. It will be very interesting. It will start with a wonderful presentation of the Ars Nova choir, which we will show you now. After that, we will start with the three presentations of this morning. So back to you with the presentation of the Ars Nova choir. From Ars Nova, the choir of the Federal University of Minas Gerais would like to thank the organizers of this Knowledge Week, and particularly the Directorship of Cultural Actions, DAC, for the invitation to take part of this event. The choir that we will show you virtual is the song NLK from U2 of the Irish band, arranged by Bob Newcott. So the video was recorded in May this year with each one of these participants in their own houses to honor the healthcare professionals that work in the front lines of the combat against coronavirus. So The soloist is Rodrigo de Freitas. I am the maestro, and I'd like to wish you all a wonderful Knowledge Week.
If the thundercloud passes rain, so let it rain, rain down on him. Ooh, so let it be. So let it be. Sleep, sleep, sleep tonight, and may your dreams be realized. If the thundercloud passes rain, so let it rain, let it rain, rain on
Deu errado. Ah! Tá parecendo meu chinelo. Teste de novo para ver a movimentação da minha boca.
a moto, olha a pizza.
Já deu tudo errado. Bom.
Wonderful. I hope you all enjoyed it. It really is fantastic, isn't it? Particularly considering the context and how it was produced. So our dear choir Oslava, thank you so much and congratulations for this wonderful presentation. Well, so to continue our event this morning, we have the great pleasure of introducing our guests who so kindly have accepted our invitation to be with us in this event during this morning. And very especially and specifically, we have 3 talks, 3 presentations, and it will in some way talk about certain facets of artificial intelligence. We know that this is a topic and part of science that has brought our attention onto it. And man, since his beginning, has always sought in some way to facilitate, to make things easier, want to attenuate the problems of life and doing work. So automata are reported from antiquity, and this has developed throughout time. But in artificial intelligence, as we know it today, AI, it came after a movement which was cybernetics, as it was known for a while, and also inspired maybe in the piece by Karel Čapek about the robots. It was a theater piece of 1920s when in fact the term the term robot appears for the first time. Now it's having someone that would do the work for you, for people. But very briefly, what was understood was that the interaction with the physical world was very difficult. Everything that involved in some way you interacting with uncertainties of the physical life made it very difficult in the beginning to develop such a humanoid creature. So in the 50s, 56, we have a famous meeting in Dartmouth where Marvin Minsky, John McCarthy, and others gathered. Minsky was 24 years old at the time to talk about what was to be artificial intelligence, and John McCarthy insisted on the term artificial intelligence in such a way to make it, to move it away from the term cybernetics, which had been used before. So then this word AI appeared, and with huge expectations. So the North American government invested, also in England, they invested huge sums to research in this area, and with the perspective of having something in a few years, a machine with the intelligence and the ability of a human being. As we know, this did not happen. So to shorten the story, to make this long story short, throughout these years, artificial intelligence then had various developments. There were times when there were lows and highs, and it re-emerged more recently, particularly because of the developments in learning, in machine learning. So we have seen impressive results as a result of this. Computer vision, and also automatic translation, and theorem deductions and other things. So many areas where AI has emerged fantastically. Now we have to be very careful, because how will we use AI? There are ethical issues, safety issues, and privacy issues that have been questioned and debated. So in fact, it is an area that really raises many questions, and particularly a lot of wisdom that will be required for this. So I won't use any more of your time. Let me introduce our speakers this morning. We have the privilege of having with us, starting with ladies first, Ana Paula Apel. Ana Paula, she is trained in computer sciences and a master's degree and a doctoral degree in computer science at the São Paulo University. She is currently a researcher and data scientist in the IBM Researcher Brazil, and she spent some time at Carnegie Mellon and works in mining of large volumes of data in finances and health, also particularly mining complex networks. Thank you very much, Dr. Ana Paula, for being with us. It's a great pleasure to welcome you. In fact, we have the privilege of listening to what you have to say about this, particularly about major databases. We also have Professor John Manzoli from music. So we will have this intersection of AI in other areas. He trained in applied mathematics and computer mathematics and regency and also composition at Unicamp. So it's marrying two different areas that apparently would be quite different. So he has a PhD at Nottingham University on music composition and is a full professor at the Institutes of Arts of Unicamp. And he coordinates the nucleus of sound composition. A composer, a mathematician, the research between mathematics and music and cognitive sciences. He works in the graduate program of music with an emphasis on creative processes and theoretical underpinnings of music. His papers focus on the topics of music composition, sound synthesis, self-organization and creativity in sound, interactive environments for composition, mathematical models applied to sound processes. So he relates music and various multimedia works and sound installations. And finally, and very importantly for us, we would like to welcome Professor David Clifton. Professor David Clifton, he is a professor of, or rather at the Oxford University, the Department of Science Engineering. In fact, his focus is machine learning for the clinical area. He's a fellow of the Reuben College at Oxford and a researcher, a fellow, as you say in English, of the Royal Academy of Engineers, and a fellow of also of the China University. He studied engineering in the Department of Engineering in Science in Oxford and was tutored by Professor Lionel Cashin. At the time, he was the head of the Department of Engineering and Science. His research focused on the development of machine learning for tracking complex health systems. Before that, he patented systems. Look at the paradox on this of health, but of the health of jet turbines, particularly those used in the Airbus 380, the Boeing Dreamliner, and the Aerofighter Typhoon. From 2008, he is focused particularly on developing methods based on this for healthcare. The patents that emerge from this work, this collaborative work, have been commercialized by means of spin-outs of the university. And so you have companies like OBS Medical, Oxford Health, and Syncine Health. These are the collaborations with other areas and multinationals. Professor Clifton, he teaches in the graduate course in mathematics and biomedical area, focused on engineering science. He has an award, of the Grand Challenge Award of the Council of the United Kingdom of Engineering and Physical Science, and also an AEPSRC fellowship that provides financial support in the long term for leaders, the future leaders in healthcare. His research has received 30 awards, and in 2018 he joined with the area of research innovation that identifies the best interdisciplinary studies in Oxford University. So we'll first yield the floor to Professor Ana Paula, ladies first, so that she can then talk. So at the end of the talks, we'll have a time for debate. So those listening to us, you can send your questions through YouTube so that we can then ask the questions of our speakers. Professor Ana Paula, please. Thank you very much, Professor Mário Campos. I also like to thank you for the kind words of Professor Sandra Regina, and also to thank you for inviting me to this event. So my presentation, let me share it. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And today I will tell you a little bit about a project that we have developed here at the research lab of IBM in the area of finances. So I want to tell you a little about this application of AI, more specifically focusing this based on machine learning. So this project, Predicting Invoice Payment to Optimize Cash, it was a project that started for a customer vows for 6 months, and it was renewed for another 7 months in the next year. And we have the name of everyone who's involved here in this project, and I ended up leading it. This project is still ongoing with, and who's working now is what we call a Think Lab, which is a unit of the research area and part of IBM that's in charge of making contact with customers and developing this work. So just to start that, for those that don't know about this is the IBM Research Lab. Globally, it's more than 3 researchers worldwide. There are people who have already won the Nobel Prize, 5 Nobel Prize, 6 Turing Awards. IBM is recognized particularly because of its leadership in creating patents and several other awards, such as National Medals of Science and National Medals of Technology. There are 12 global labs. One of them is in Brazil. Here in Brazil, we have about 100 researchers. We have 2 sites, 2 places, one in Sao Paulo, where I work, and the other place is in Rio de Janeiro. There are also some people who are in a center in a place called Hortolândia. So this is just to give you a context. So this year, IBM Research, well, has a different topic each year, and it made forecasts for the next 5 years and more than before. With this chaotic year that we're going through, we have this sense of urgency in science. So the forecasts of IBM were mostly in this context, this need for us to having scientific methods to analyze things and to look at the importance of science in this context. So this is a topic that's present in the company, this sense of urgency in science, to have science as a basis for innovation and to develop and to produce knowledge towards a more sustainable world, and also for a more sustainable company, a company that will bring quality and also safety to its own customers in developing research. In this context, this week, or rather the last week, the Artificial Intelligence Center was inaugurated. IBM Research, together with FAPESP and São Paulo University, have organized this research center for AI, where we will have the possibility of advancing the research, the studies on AI in our country. Of course, this happens with collaborations with other major universities and other centers, so that we can do this. Also to develop research, state-of-the-art research in AI, going to areas such as open research, and to move forward in several other areas, not only in artificial intelligence, but also AI applied to agriculture, to healthcare, and to several other areas. All of this is so important for us, and we need this, and also in our interaction with the government. So Professor Mario has introduced me, but for those of you who don't know me, I come from database area. I've always worked with data science. It was known before as data mining, and my area of research is in mining data, but I will talk more about the specific topic. But since 2012, I have become involved with IBM research. Before that, I did go to the Federal University of Minas Gerais. I wanted to go there, but ended up going back to Sao Paulo for family reasons. So what are the project goals? This project was in the area of finances, and the goal of this project was to predict payments. So you can imagine, for instance, you have customers and that you loan, or they will lend money to others, and in some way they have to recover this money. It has to be paid back, of course. A loan needs to be paid. So he has to be able to predict when customers will pay, when those that have taken the loan will pay back. And so that you can have an expectation, you want to know if that consumer of yours will pay on the deadline, or delay payments, or default. There are people who work phoning consumers to ask them to pay, but you don't have an infinite number of people who can actually phone to every single client of yours. So you need to be able to have some forecast, some idea. You have to optimize this resource of yours and to know really to whom you need to actually phone or not. Of course, in this area, usually you tend to phone to those that owe more, but those that owe more may not necessarily be the ones that will actually pay. And so in time, this can have an impact. This can incur in further losses. So you need to make good decision making at this point. We also know that it's important to use historical data, but since we created these features of this process that take into account time, then you have also a decision on the model itself. When we work with our projects with customers, you have other decisions to make as well. When you have a project, your customer need to work with this model. Not everyone will have the expertise to retrain the model, and so you have also issues of the applicability of the model and how do you actually get people to use it and to adapt it and to improve the model, to put it really operating, or put it in production. So you have several decisions to make. So just to explain a little bit, in our case, our customer, they follow this process. So you have customer acquisition, you have the management of the order. For loaning cash, you give the money, and then you have to manage the credit. So we work more on this area. Well, eventually, we work on this area, the highlighted area, which is management of collections and deductions, disputes, and how to manage that, and how you will deal with those clients who haven't defaulted, so that they eventually pay you back the loan that they have taken. In our case, we define this problem as a binary system classification, a binary classification where you have these characteristics. The slides, by the way, are in English. You have the characteristics of your invoice, and at the end, you have an answer if the invoice was paid on the deadline or if it was delayed, the payment was delayed. Because of system issues, there are some old legacy systems, so we think that an invoice is paid on the date if the payment was done until up to 5 days after the deadline. Beyond that, it is considered as being delayed. The payment is delayed. Well, in our data distribution, the data information, we have consumers in several countries. So we have this distribution and a different number of invoices and a different number of customers as well. So why not having a model for each country? But as you can see here, for some countries, we have not enough data. So basically, we created a model, a global model, if you want. So the project started with numbers only from Latin America. And as we extended the project, we then had to extend this by adding data of North America, more specifically, not only North America, but and Latin America as well. So these are numbers from 2019. For Latin America, we also have numbers from 2017. And in 2017, there was a change in behavior, significant change. So we saw what we called a contact drift in our data in 2017. So we ended up discarding data from 2017 because it was basically inserting so much noise into our models. So this is the current distribution of the data as we have it. This is the invoice distribution by category. You can see how much people default or delay payments in their invoices. Most of them pay up to 30 days late, and then it drops below that. Of course, for 2019, the second phase of the project was in 2019. So the numbers that we had in 2019 was low, less than what we had in 2018, particularly in different categories. When you look at longer delays in payments, over 90 days. Now, having done all that, we have all the various features. And we started with very poor data on our customers. So there was a matter of having to create new data, new characteristics for for that data. As you can see here, home office at home, we have several other types of noise, as you can see when you work with your home office. But anyway, just back here, we have to manage the noise, creating these features for our invoices. In our invoices, we had an ID per customer, the date in which the invoice was created, when it was paid, the date exactly of payment, the value that was paid, and a few other fields in processing from which we couldn't initially take much information. So what did we do? We created some features, particularly features as relating to time. The first one, for instance, paid invoice. We created 3 attributes where I can tell that the 3 last invoices of that customer were paid on date or were paid delayed, or if I have no information. So I have an average of how many invoices the customer has actually paid. I also create the value, how much was paid, how many invoices are late or unpaid or defaulted, and how many of them have not been paid. What's the total value of the paid invoices that were paid after the last payment, the due date? What is the number of days of delay, number of days that of the invoices that are still open that have not been paid yet? What's the frequency of payment, whether customers pay 30, 45, or 60 days, the number of contracts for a specific customer. And we have a point here that one invoice pertains to a contract, but the customer may have more than one contract. He may ask to have an invoice that has to do with all of the contracts. We also put another piece of information, which was credit. What's the credit score that the customer has? This was already present in the data. And another category of variable, for what country the customer belonged to. We only had an ID for the customers to correlate with the invoices, nothing else. This is our pipeline. So we divided our data into training, test, and then to create the pipeline itself for the data. So training data, we cleaned out the system and understood the data, created those features, the same with the test data, and then we worked with the results and how these results are presented. So we have the customers or the data for our customers and the features created daily, and this goes into the system. These are the various approaches. We have 6 types of classifiers, from the most traditional to a deep neural network, to see how it works in our model. But there is a point when we calculate these features, these historical characteristics. How much do I have to look at the data? Do I use all of my data set 1 year or 2 months or 3 months? What's the best time or the best time period? What's the best window of opportunity or the time window that I need to use rather to calculate these features? So we ran a test dividing our data in this, and then you can see with the various methods, the time window is about 4 months, which would be the best. So I don't have to look 1 year ago to calculate the features. 4 months is enough. Looking at the last 4 months, this allows me to make adequate calculations to see if the invoices are paid, if they are not paid, or if they are paid after the due date, which of course makes sense, particularly when we look at those 3 last invoices of the customer. In most cases, this has to do with the last 3 months of payment. So if a customer does not pay the last three invoices, the chance of not paying the next ones is much higher. So for a year ago, maybe this will not reflect so well the current situation of the customer. This makes sense in payment data If we think, of, for instance, in very old data, 10 years ago or so on, the payment system is so different than what happens today, so it doesn't really make that much sense. Right, having done that, we used 4 months as historical data. So we have a global accuracy and monthly accuracy. The average is around 80% for the data. The data that we received initially were very poor quality data, so we had to work on this, of engineering of characteristics and features, working on them. So, which is why we have all of this work of pre-processing of data, which is much more important than the model itself. If you look at the behaviors of the model, as you can see here, for instance, in logistic regressions, in logistic regression, you see these scores, and others were quite similar, so including the neural network. In our case, we ended up introducing the XG boost. It's easier to understand and to work with, and easier to see what are the features that are really important than if we use a neural network, even if it's a simpler one. So we use the XG boost. This is accuracy. Another test that we did was a robustness model, particularly because of these two phases in the model. We tested by putting the data, for instance, of the US, which were much higher than those of other, more numerous than in other areas, if this would interfere, and what would be the interference, whether it would be a positive or negative interference. So North America and Latin America, the data sets for each. So we did these tests, North America and Latin America, NA is North America and so on. And then we had general accuracy, and we can see that the accuracy, when we include North American data, improved the accuracy of the model. So the general model has higher accuracy than if I divided for each area, North or South, or North or Latin America. And this makes it easier for our client to manage this model, because our clients intend to add other countries. This is just another example of visualization. So if you look at the collectors who will make this connection and who will ring to customers, they can know the number of invoices that they have to receive for each customer and the forecasts for each one of them, whether they'll be paid within the due date or not, and to which customers they need to phone or to contact. Well, besides that, we also ran some tests. As I said, they would access the consumers based on a due value. We did a change, a simple change, because we know that adoption is still a bit restricted in AI. But anyway, if we want to do something far too different, probably it would not be accepted. The collectors would not really use the system if we introduced too many changes, and they would just keep doing it as before. So we introduced changes slowly and gradually. What we did was to create a new manner. So for instance, if you have a customer that owes you 1 million and another one that owes 300,000, and the probability of the one that owes 300,000 is much higher to not pay than the million one, I really need to phone the 300,000 one, not the 1 million one. So what we did was to use this value of the invoice together with the probability of that invoice being paid late. And we then calculate an average for each customer, and then we prioritize. And to show our solution and how this could have an impact, we ran a simulation, which is this chart down there. So letter A, B, and C, in fact, this will pertain to the first month. It means that if I ring such customers, or the first 200 or 300 customers, this is what will happen. So we have information, for instance, that these collectors, in fact, manage about 100 customers each. So they have 100 accounts to manage per month, basically. So then in the x-axis, we have the probability of if they contact, whether payment will be made or not. So in probability 1, for all of the 100 customers did in fact pay after being contacted. In probability 0, or the 100 customers to which they contact, no one paid. And then you have the in-between. So we can then see in the y-axis the numbers in millions of dollars that we can recover. So in the first chart, you can see that with 100, with probability 1, if I contact 100 customers and all of them pay, and I get collection, I will recover $1.75 more than if I take into account just the value itself of the invoice. When I put this probability of the delay, in the best case, I can recover 1.75 million more extra dollars compared to if I just used the zero probability, where all the calls did not change things. It would just recover what was recovered before without using the system. So 0 would show how much you would get traditionally and what you would get extra. In other situations, I win. Even if I don't reach such high numbers, I will achieve something around $500,000, for instance, which is already a significant amount for a simple change like this. So in fact, this is an example of a project, a small project. Usually projects in labs are longer. So this was a shorter project, if you want, somewhat simpler. We have other more complex projects, for instance, in natural resources, for instance, in oil. My area now is more in the financial department, payments and credit risk and so on. But we find here that when we work with AI, it's very important for us to gather data and to pre-process these data. And AI, even with simple changes, can bring major benefits if it's applied well. So just to conclude, these are some of the results of the project. So we showed that we can build a model that use historical features. We have good accuracy. Ranking is good. Just a simple change can actually bring profit to our customers. We see that we don't have to use all of the historical data to look at these features or to create the adequate features for our predictions. And we also created an API, put this model into practice to make it easier for our client to manage his customers and to change the model and update it. So basically that's it. Thank you very much. And thank you for participating. And I hope you liked it. Thank you, Professor Ana Paula. It really is a huge challenge, isn't it? Because of the volume of the data and various points. Certainly we will have questions. And some questions have already come up here. Well, I'll now like to give the floor to Professor Jonatas, who will present to us the intersections in music. He is trained in maths and music. A very interesting talk. And we encourage questions. So Professor Jonatas, the floor is yours. Once again, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Good afternoon. I first of all would like to thank you for the invitation. And I think we have very strong reason to be together because after all, we all work for knowledge, and knowledge brings us together, and it's the most important mission that we have. I'd like to thank Professor Mario, and also to thank Professor Sandra, the Dean of the University, and also to thank my colleagues at the music school, Professor Mauricio and others, my colleagues. We've been together now for many years working on these systems on music composition since 1994, when the Brazilian Society of Competition created this area, this department. And this path which I want to show you today, was developed thanks to our work as a coordinator of this area for several years. I'm no longer the coordinator at this point. Now I'm passing the baton over to younger people. The current coordinator is Professor Tiago Tavares. We have great talks, and we've really moved forward very significantly. So let me talk. Rather, my talk has two parts. One is an epistemic perspective on the interaction between art and science. And then I will present 3 examples of works with which I work or where I worked in. And after that, I will show you an example of an opera in which we dealt with the interaction between intelligence and creativity. So let's start here. In music and also in science, we work with models, right? And these models mean representations such as this. This is the Lorentz attractor, or are the representations such as this one, for instance. We see in caves, man trying to represent something, trying to represent his thoughts and his interactions. So art makes use of representations that are connected to the ability to imagine and develop ideas of man going beyond the dimensions of representations themselves. And I would call this expansionism of art. On the other hand, as we've just heard now, we have a huge ability of extracting data from natural phenomena in different scientific disciplines that goes way beyond our ability to understand them, or the means in which we can actually understand these things, these data. So here we have to work with a different paradigm, which is a reductionist paradigm of science. But what brings me here today is that evidently all of us work with representations, and these representations, they can, for instance, be sheet music like this, of the second work of Mahler, of a magnificent work where you see a representation of an opera in its details in the creative process, or represented like this. These are representations used by Chanak, an architect, and evidently he was also a musician. And from this representation, this wonderful representation, he generated this Philips Pavilion in the 60s. So what I want to bring to you today is the following. Is it interesting for us to develop adaptive systems to help the creative process? By that, I mean in its broadest sense, the creative process in science and art. And particularly, I would like to say that we develop a path with which we interact and through which we seek to develop these possibilities. The material I'm presenting to you is in this chapter of this book, which I wrote together with Professor Paul Verschoor, Computational Modeling of Mind and Music. And basically, we started with 3 points of view: the notion of representation, with which we can look at the objects around us, the possibility of perceiving these objects that surround us, and particularly the connection between representation and perception, which is action. For us, intelligence is not an object, is not a fact simply. It is an act, an embodied act, an act of connection between representation and perception. And it is from this interaction between representation and perception, from this we can develop models to understand our world. And from these models, we then decide to work on the notion of adaptation, because we believe that the ability I think we have just had a temporary problem with the connection of Professor Jonas. Let's just wait for a few minutes. These are things that happen in virtual meetings because of the intense use of the internet. But let's just wait for a few minutes while Professor Jonas reconnects. We are making contact with him. We'll get things sorted out shortly. He had a problem with his internet connections. He's routing it through 4G. So, well, let's see if we can reconnect. Just a few more minutes, but we'll connect him. So I think Professor Johns is back. He's just testing the audio. He still has a few difficulties. As I said, he's trying to route it through 4G. While he does that, let me just remind you of the activities of the week. This after, oh, he's back, I think. Still a few difficulties. Well, we'll do something different. Let's see. Maybe using 4G with audio and projecting the slides from here. So just a second. Professor Jonathan, the audio is not really working at this point. Well, I sent the material from my presentation. If I can't show it from here, I would ask with excuses, of course, for the colleagues to listen to the last video I sent, which is a performance of the opera Discovery. It's an 8-minute video, and I think that it summarizes everything, or most of what I would speak. Well, yes, I have your presentation here. If you just tell me which slide I can show, what will be the slide, I can just show it from here. Yeah, let me share it from here. Okay. Well, let's go to slide number 11, please. Yes, we were talking about the possibility of working with representations and building a model that would be able to use computers in creative processes. Next slide, please. Just click on the next one. The idea is to develop adaptive systems to help in the creative process, and our talk is about these possibilities. So then, as I said before, this study was presented in this book. That speaks about mind and music models, and our talk basically is a summary of this paper. So what I want to talk to you about is about using the idea. You can click more, please, Professor. That we work with the ideas that we work with representation, perception, and action, and also these models of perception and action lead us to this concept of models, and for that we use the computer. And in using a computer, the idea is to develop devices in the real world, to use music devices or devices in the real world to generate adaptive processes that provide a sense of emergence in these processes. And this generates what we know as self-organization. So these processes of self-organization result in artifacts, and these artifacts that we use are devices of the real world. And particularly, I want to show you an application of our first study with a real-world device. This was done in 1998. This is called Robozair. So this is the first time that we used composition using this small computer. In this application, we use the path of the robot as a mechanism but not the path in the points of space that the robot was moving, but rather the moment or the way in which the robot would relate with the objects around it. So we can look at this, for instance, in this behavior. So for instance, this robot moves in space attracted by light, and in doing so, it generates what we call the time of sound movement. The sound movement would reproduce the path as it avoided collisions, and also generated music. This configuration of a robot developing music then gave rise to ADA, which is an intelligent space, which is what I want to talk to you about shortly. But basically then, what we had in this first moment, the micro robot Kefera, it navigated attracted by light, it would avoid collisions, and it would set up a space with the memory of the references of the colors in the arena. And in building or having this interaction between space and the colors in the arena will help the machine to self-organize its understanding of space. And this was understood as a project, or rather an object for creating music. The next one was as follows. We call this possibility of using navigation of robots in space by moving around, avoiding collisions and so on, and attracted by light. We use this in what we call decomposition in the real world. And this idea of composing the real world was then summarized like this: the behavior of a robot in the arena, which was the source of music composition. The second application came from using the Kefera directly. We then went to this idea of intelligence architecture, where people would relate with the physical space, and in doing so, they would generate sound effects and light effects and musical effects as well. And this interaction then was presented in an installation, the name of which was Ada Lovelace, for the Countess of Lovelace, which was the first woman to idealize the idea of computers, that computers not only would calculate, but would also generate music. The engine machine, the calculating machine of Ada, also foresaw a representation of music and also representing emotion. And it's very much what we're trying to do with Ada. So Ada, or Ada, had a very specific architecture. It would relate with people, starting from its more general objectives, such as surviving, recognizing, and interacting. So this would provide a circuit where the visitors would visit ADA or ADA, and then would produce sound and light effects. And this production, it will come from representations. A very important thing of ADA or ADA was this, which was the floor. We would call it the eyes, the skin eyes of ADA, which is an organ of interaction where the play of light would allow ADA to communicate. This also was pressure sensitive, so it not only defined where each person was standing, was there in space, it would also provide direction of people in space and would work again as an artificial neural network that would simulate some form of synaptic interactivity. So, well, with that, we were then able to build a way in which we could bring together the states, all things that happen. So ADA would relate with people, would interact in its global goals of survival, recognition, and interaction. And as a result of that, to communicate with the visits, it would produce a set of musical motifs that were connected to their behavior. So or rather to the interaction with people who are in that particular area. So with that, we can look in general terms at a day in the life of Ada. So let's look at what will be the short video that shows the behavior of this machine. Next, please. If we can have the next slide, please. So let's see how Ada would behave. We have the floor and people moving there and interacting with the machine. And as this happens, as people become aware of this, both people and Ada, as they understand what happens in space, Ada shows sound and light images and sound so that people can then interact with that. So it tries to communicate from the information of light and sound, and it communicates its emotions by means of these sounds of music. So in this project that we developed together with a team of about 25 researchers worldwide, our mission was to create these interactions, the musical interactions between Ada and the visitors. And this was a very interesting experience because after Ada, we were able to understand specifically other mechanisms with which we then worked for a few years after 2002. And Ada got 550,000 visitors and was open 6 months. The next one we wanted to present to you is the multimodal orchestra. In this case, we closed the European Conference of Science Beyond Fiction. So let's see if we can listen to a short excerpt of the multimodal brain orchestra to see how it works. So we see that the musicians had caps to pick up brain signals, and the interaction of these musicians with the interface of the computer would generate a possibility of interacting between them and to produce a soundtrack interactively by using the sound, this orchestra. And this was presented in the closing ceremony of this European Conference of Science Beyond Fiction. So we presented this with other colleagues, and our goal here was to produce an interaction process between the interfaces of the computer and the brain, and also to guide the presentation by using gestures with which we could interact with the brain caps, with the various cerebral interpreters, if you want. In the next slide. So this gives you a general idea of how this works, of this interaction of Ada or Ada. So there were two interpreters that would use brain signals, the P300 and other ones that was called the SSVEP. The first signal each of them had two. The first is a response to the brain at 300 milliseconds after the stimulus. The second is the response to the stimulus by frequency resonance of the stimulated frequency. So what would happen in Ada is that the conductor would give signals, and then these two types of interactions, the P300 and SSVEP, would interact with and the brain caps will articulate what we called sound landscapes, sound events, with which Ada would then create its own soundtrack. And we also had what we called an effective agent using biosignals, and this would be able to change the audiovisual landscape. This aspect was very important because by using the effective agent in presenting this work. We also developed extra work with the SPEC group of Barcelona to also use this in helping recover people with neurological problems. And this technology results from these aspects. In other words, interaction between sound, movement, and also these types of biosensors. So let's continue then, Professor, please. Next one, please. If I can have the next slide, please. Can we have the next slide, please, Professor Mario? If we can continue the next slide, please. So, right, we've got the next slide. Okay. So intelligence is not only linked to the ability to solve and create problems. So if I could, yeah, this slide, please. So I'd like to show you, just to close my presentation, and please, I'd like to apologize for these problems, but I'd like to show you part of this multimodal opera in which we dealt with all of these interactions, starting from movement and the music. The opera was then created in 2016 when we celebrated 50 years of UNICAMP. And for us, the main message of working with these discoveries in 2016 was the message I want to convey to you today, that knowledge between areas of art and science are supplementary. They supplement each other. All of us seek and try to understand our own process of discovery. So to discover is a primary need of human beings. It's a way in which we can relate to the world and relate with nature and with others. And in such a difficult moment, or a rather difficult moment, such as the one we're going through, I'd like to leave a message to you from this work. If we join to discover more and our own self-discoveries, we will understand ourselves better. So just keep the music going, please, Professor. So it was this idea of representation, perception, and action, and the idea of models. And the importance of how this interaction, perception, and action will develop models with which we can build our artifacts. And so there's this message I'd like to leave with you. Intelligence is not only connected to the ability to solve and create problems. Next slide. But intelligence has to do with the ability of becoming surprised and exploring and adapting, whether in the songs of science or in the works of art. Here, using this idea, this cross-section in which we're involved. So again, next one, please. And to say also that science doesn't only explain science, and music doesn't only produce phenomena for science, but they supplement each other, they complete each other, and this sense of wholeness, this is what we seek, and it is something that we'd like to live with. In universities and in teaching and research, this is what we want. I think that dialogue between art and science offers infinite possibilities for study that we need to preserve and to encourage in all of our public institutions in research and science, notwithstanding the various handicaps. So thank you very much. And I apologize for the technical difficulties in connection, but I think the message is given. And thank you for the invitation. Thank you. Professor Jontas, problem. Yes, we have things that we experienced. We know that it's not your fault. And of course, the internet has always brought up difficulties for us. So yes, and certain frustrations. But anyway, thank you for your talk. Very intriguing. It's a different perception, a different experience of life. And I saw a bit of it in the CAFRA when we worked this as well. So, and to see CAFRA interacting like this with art is something very interesting. Also to say that you saw the challenges right at the back there in interacting with the real world. And it's bodiless intelligence, what we call that. So we see that in fact, to deal with the physical world is not trivial. Right, now, thank you, that's the point. The real world is a world that makes us more creative and more intelligent. Yeah, the challenges of uncertainties. Well, thank you then, Professor. So now we will go on and yield the floor to Professor David Clifton. Thank you once again for being available. And you're 4 hours different in the time zone, but again, once again, our thanks to you. And you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Can you all see the slides okay? Are the slides showing for you? They are. Fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much for the invitation to speak to you today. And it's a great pleasure to be here, if only virtually. I love to spend time in Brazil, and I look forward to being able to do so and to see some of you in person at the next opportunity. But for now, it's a great pleasure to be able to enjoy some of the research that's been spoken about this morning. And I think if there's one theme of the research today, it's that AI can affect the real world and can do good in the world. It's not merely a pocket of academic study, but it's a way in which we can affect the world for the better. And I'm an engineer. Engineers are famous for building things, and I firmly believe in using engineering to improve society. Now, of course, we're living in unprecedented times, and hopefully that what will come out of the presentation today is some of the ways that I believe that artificial intelligence can help society, particularly in these difficult times. Touching on some examples, of course, from our own work. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'll now proceed. So, as you heard in the introduction, I'm a professor of AI, but I focus almost all of my time in the healthcare arena. So healthcare being an extremely data-rich environment now. And some of the work that we're embarking upon in this area is with world-leading clinicians, for example, from UFMG, Professor Antonio Ribeiro, with whom we're looking at very, very large collections of human physiological data from the heart to see if artificial intelligence can help in the diagnosis of patients with various heart diseases. We'll get to that in a minute. Let me first of all take a step back and just show you where I come from. Actually, I am here today. We are allowed to go back to our laboratories now under strictly controlled conditions, and I'm here alone in a modern green building. Just in the medical campus of the University of Oxford. So it's mostly empty at the moment, but there's just me and a few other people in here at the moment. I also have a laboratory in China, which is part of the Oxford University Research Centre, just based outside Shanghai, around East China, if you know that area. And one of the themes of this research is going to be AI, of course, does need big computers. And we're very lucky both in the UK and in China. And here I'm showing you our computer in the Chinese lab. It's literally a computer that you can walk into. So artificial intelligence needs a huge amount of compute these days. But what I want to demonstrate is that AI has a lot to do to help low and middle income countries. And that's a big emphasis of our work in healthcare systems in the UK and Europe, and now through our UFMG collaboration in Brazil, but also in low and middle income countries as well. So I'll touch on that in a minute. So the global population looks a little bit like this. If we took the map and looked at and distorted the countries by relative population, we end up with a familiar picture of where the world's people live. Here is where the world's working doctors live, working physicians. And you can see that there are whole regions, particularly in Africa, where my father's family comes from, where there are very, very few working physicians. And one of the themes that I'd like, as I say, to present to you is that AI can help in these circumstances. AI can bring technologies to under-resourced countries to help, particularly in healthcare. Global healthcare expenditure, where we're spending the money, as you can see, it's hugely Eurocentric, North America, Japan, and again, there are whole areas of the world which are massively underserved in terms of access to healthcare. Okay, so that's the setting, that's the bad news. I'm a technologist, I'm an optimist by training through being an engineer, and I'll highlight some of the ways in which this can help. Okay, so one of the ways in which we're starting to address technologies is for low and middle income countries, you really have to be there. So here, this is Ho Chi Minh City, was Saigon in Vietnam, where the Wellcome Trust has created a funding arrangement between us here in Oxford and the Oxford University Clinical Research Unit, which has been in Ho Chi Minh City for about 30 years. And one of the key points about using artificial intelligence is you can't just turn up as a computer scientist, as all the previous presenters have shown. You've got to work with the people who know about the data and who understand it. That was in finance in the first presentation, in music and performing arts in the second. And for me, that means doctors. So here is the team that works in Vietnam. There's a bunch of machine learning researchers and AI researchers, and there's also a bunch of infectious disease doctors who are able to help us understand the data and to be able to basically tell us what it is that would be helpful in these circumstances. So a lot of people trying to translate technologies into low income settings. You've really got to be on the ground to be able to do that. So we're very fortunate to have this particular centre with the Wellcome Trust to do that. And I'll touch a little bit on what's coming out of that later. Okay, so I talk about AI in healthcare, and there are some serious barriers to entry. Most people, when they think about AI in healthcare, they think about medical imaging, maybe a scan or an ultrasound when pregnant, something like that. But more generally, AI is not just about images, it's about your genomic data. It's about all sorts of other sensor data. I'll touch on that in a minute. And it's really hard to get into it. And one of the goals in health AI is to make it more accessible to researchers across the world. So for example, what do we need to get in here? Yes, you need artificial intelligence researchers, and we're getting very good at training them. But you've got to have, as I was just saying, you've got to have the clinicians to help you understand the data, and you've got to have huge amounts of it. You've got to have lots and lots of data. Data is the new oil, people say, particularly in healthcare. Getting data is difficult, and the governance levels, you've got to get ethics, you've got to demonstrate you're preserving patient privacy, etc. These are all very, very high barriers to entry. And so it's understandable why not very much makes it from an AI lab into clinical practice. So what I want to show you is some examples of how we can get over those barriers and deliver something for society. That's the theme of some of the innovations that we're seeing at this fantastic event that the organisers put on for us. Okay, so in my particular world, the kind of data that I'm dealing with change through time, and they're not imaging. So they're things like the vital signs, your heart rates and your blood pressures that change through time. And we put in systems into the hospitals to collect these data. Things like the blood tests. So you get a blood test taken routinely in clinical practice for every patient every day. There's a lot of data that's automatically being collected. Increasingly, we're getting genomic data, so we can sequence patients' data, we can do what are called assays to get particularly important bits of the genome that we think are going to be important, and this is getting much cheaper to do. We're in healthcare systems globally, we're collecting really large quantities of prescriptions, which drugs the patients are on, the diseases that they've got, the diagnoses, etc. So there's a lot we know about people now from stays throughout their lives in hospitals. We're getting decades and decades worth of data in some cases. You know that AI is brilliant for handling these kind of data. And so artificial intelligence in collaboration with doctors has a lot of opportunities. Increasingly, we're getting things like wearable sensing data. So we might be wearing or putting these on patients to collect sensor data, very, very high rate, often a lot of noise and garbage. It's a completely different kind of additional data that we have to deal with in healthcare these days. Okay, and we take all of these data types and we're going to talk about some of the AI techniques that we use. For those of you who know the field, the kind of thing that we do lies between these two types of machine learning. And I'll just quickly mention the names. There's deep learning, which everybody knows, I think, from the national press, is about very large deep neural networks, take a lot of compute to train, of course. And then these other probabilistic approaches, Bayesian non-parametrics, which are really good for handling noisy data and forecasting, predicting the future. And what we care about is the interface between these two quite a lot, because deep learning on its own is good, but if you can handle noisy data in a real way, and the data from patients is very noisy, they're moving, they're artifactual, there's a lot of noise in there. So the combination of these two schools of AI is really important for us, particularly in healthcare. Okay, but we've got to get the data. And when I started as a postdoc in maybe 2009, everything was on paper. So we were getting nurses to transcribe huge piles of patient data from paper into an electronic format. Obviously, that's not going to work at scale, is it? So what we decided to put some systems into the hospital. We put these things in. These are data acquisition devices that have gone into the Oxford University hospitals, and they collect the data that we need. And unsurprisingly, before they were in there was a lot of resistance. Hospitals wanted to use paper because it was familiar, and paper doesn't crash, and it doesn't have internet problems, as we've seen today. But it's all about, medics are very sensible people. If you put something in and you demonstrate that it works and you demonstrate that it's got a positive effect for the patient, then it will stay and it will be used. And we put these in about 2015, and these are now being used to acquire data from all patients all the time in the Oxford University hospitals, which provides healthcare for quite a big chunk of the UK. And so we have got a huge amount of data. It's all patient confidential. We have to use ethics to get the data, but it's all there. We've got millions of patient admissions now, so there's a lot we can do with machine learning. Okay, so in the developing world, in low middle income countries, this might be your data acquisition system. So for example, in the Vietnam project that I've showed you, here is a patient monitor, but it is shared between maybe 4 or 5 beds. There's lots of different people plugged into this at one time, and the nurse might switch between the patients, because there's not much kit to go around. And for those of you who know the field, this is a good monitor, but it's a relatively old-fashioned bit of kit. You can kind of tell that by looking at it. So what can we do in AI to take all the rich data that we've got from, let's say, the UK and other rich data healthcare systems, and use those data to help us in a low-income setting where we've got limited technology like this? AI is really good for that, particularly modern AI. We can train very good models which are based on rich data, and then we can deploy those models in, for example, Vietnam, and use the smaller amount of Vietnam data to customize, to tailor the models to fit the Vietnam healthcare system. So that I'll touch on that in a little bit. Okay, so what we're reaching now is we're reaching the stage where we need AI to help us train the AI, if that makes sense. So traditionally, you would take some data, and in the jargon of the field, this is electronic health record data. So it just means your health data collected by the records from the hospital. And we might want to train models to predict things, such as health deteriorating in the hospital, or risk of COVID-19 deterioration in the next 6 hours, for example. And we're used to constructing models for doing that. We've seen some examples today. But there's a limit to how much a human is able to train these models when the models get really, really complicated. And the models are getting very, very deep now. So the neural networks that we train are extremely deep. They've got millions, sometimes billions of parameters to set during the training process. It gets really difficult for humans to do this or to understand what's in it. So the hypothesis here is, can AI help in training these models? So it's an AI to train the AI. So for example, in this little cartoon here, we have what are called teacher networks, which is another deep neural network that is helping us to construct the deep neural network that we care about, maybe the COVID-19 disease predictor, something like that. So this relationship between student models and teacher models is really important for us in modern machine learning, and it's quite a hot topic in what's called meta learning, if you know the field. Okay, so here is an example. This is a very, very complex neural network. And we've got this based on data from Oxford University Hospital. So you've got a huge amount of patient data coming in here. And this here is the student network. It's the thing in the box that I just showed you. Actually, the real network is way deeper than this. This is just an example. If you know what neural networks look like when you open it up. The real neural networks we're talking about are extremely deep with all sorts of strange layers. But what we've got here is the teacher network. And what the teacher network is doing is helping us by choosing which data the student is going to learn from best. So this is where the student and teacher analogy comes in, because before this kind of approach, we would just take a huge data set, hope that the training of the model here could use all those data in an optimal way and get a single model. What we're doing now is we recognize that we've got 2 million patient data sets here, and they're changing through time. They may be weeks, they may be months in duration, each one of those 2 million. There's a vast quantity of data, and it's really hard for a human to be able to train a machine learning algorithm to be able to perform well here. So the AI is getting really good at being able to take subsets of the data and to take those bits of data and to feed them to the student. So just like in a classroom, the student is learning based on the data that the teacher is providing. And just like in a classroom, as the student gets better, the teacher has learned which data to present to the students to help them learn better. So you can see the goal is to help the student learn, but the teacher is learning how to teach the students as we go along. It's a very, very exciting field, and it really helps us when the data sets are getting far too big for us to use conventional training methods. And engineers love tables of results. You can see here that what I'm showing you here is we can boost performance by using these kind of techniques. If you happen to know what classification accuracy, for example, means, if a patient comes into a hospital, we want to predict in advance which ward, which bed to get ready in advance, rather than waiting to find out what the patient needs. We want to get the bed ready in advance. That is usually a 1 in 7 or 1 in 8 classification task. You've got 8 different kinds of beds you might need to get ready. And we're getting very, very good at being able to, as you can see here, these prediction accuracies, mean accuracies, are how frequently we can predict which bed the patient is going to need before they need it. So the goal here in the hospital setting is to get things ready before the patient needs it, because actually what happens without that is that the patient comes slowly through the hospital and everything is done reactively. Oh, now this patient needs this particular bed. Let's get this bed ready. Whereas a whole lot of that we can do in advance. A bit like manufacturing a car, where you get everything ready in advance, such that as the car moves through the factory, everything is ready for it. So that's the general principle here. Like I say, you need these AIs to train the AIs to help you get the most out of these massive data sets that we've now collected. Okay, so that's the AI meta-learning approach. Let's have a look at some tangible examples of how we can use these things to help. Excuse me. So we're very aware of the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. One of the big projects that we've been running from our lab in Oxford is recognizing that it takes ages to get a test. So even in a hospital, when someone comes into the emergency department, they often have a test is made, a COVID-19 test, and the doctor has to wait maybe a day or slightly more in order to get the result, which is a very bad thing if you need to know where to send the patient now. Has the patient got COVID-19? Do I send them to the COVID-19 wards, or do I risk it and send them to the rest of the hospital where infection control is lesser? And what are you going to do? Wait for a day to get the test results? You can't do that. And so what's happening is that clinicians are using clinical judgment, of course, to make those predictions. And we've demonstrated that machine learning can actually do better than human clinical judgment. And we can predict quite accurately the test result that is going to come back in a week's time based on data that are routinely collected. So as I said earlier, everybody's getting blood tests in hospitals every day, and it tells you all the contents of your blood, things like the white blood cell count and so on. And we can use those routine blood tests to make really accurate predictions about COVID-19, positive or negative, have they got this disease. It's also free, essentially. Tests are quite expensive and they're limited in resource. Certainly in March and in April in the UK, doctors were trying to prioritise which patients should get the test. Here, as long as the patient's got a routine blood test, everybody gets the COVID-19 AI test. It's really, really easy. It's effectively cost-free, and it occurs almost instantaneously. So this is a project very exciting, which is being prototyped. As in the UK, we're getting towards the second wave of the pandemic. Cases are going up again. Just today, a part of the United Kingdom, Wales, has announced another 2-week lockdown, effectively. So they've gone into a second lockdown. So we're getting ready for this second wave. And technologies like this, we think, based on AI, can help a lot. Okay. So broadening what AI can do for us, thinking beyond the pandemic, there are plenty of other infectious diseases, of course, in the world, tuberculosis being one of the big ones. Tuberculosis kills 1 million people every year. We don't tend to talk about tuberculosis very much. We've seen very high death rates recently from COVID-19, but tuberculosis kills 1 million every year without fail. It's a very nasty disease. So this is a program led by researchers at the University of Oxford, clinical researchers in infectious disease, that has the Centres for Disease Controls of all these major companies involved. And you can see, I think Brazil's Centre for Disease Control is involved in this project as well. Basically, what we're doing is we're collecting genomic data from tuberculosis, but what we're doing is we're not taking human data, we're taking the genome of the bug. So you take a blood sample, and then you ignore the human DNA, you find the bug that's in the blood sample, and you get the genetic data of the bug. What do you do with that genetic data? You then pass it to a machine learning system, and the machine learning system can make predictions about which drugs are going to work to kill that particular strain of tuberculosis. You may have heard about antimicrobial resistance, where the bugs are evolving resistance to our drugs. So it would be terrible if we gave somebody a drug that didn't kill the bug because the bug was resistant to it. So the goal here is to, based on the genomic data, make predictions for the clinicians to be able to determine which drug is going to work for this particular patient that's here. So just like we were saying, we collect, each row is a different bug of the data sets that we've collected globally from the sites I've shown you before. And then genetic data is a series of binary data. It tells us, have I got any of these mutations in this particular bug? So in bug number 1, they've got this particular mutation, they haven't got those. And it's the mutations in the genome that confer resistance to the drugs. So we put those mutations into a big deep learning system, and then we make predictions about which of the drugs are going to be used. It's a really exciting project, and has resulted in a lot of good academic papers, but most importantly, it's helping clinicians change from using tuberculosis labs to just doing a blood test and some machine learning. You can see the theme here. Machine learning is really helpful for doing things quickly and cheaply and helping doctors. We're not trying to replace doctors, we're trying to help them based on what's available. Okay, I've mentioned colleagues in UFMG, some world-leading cardiologists. This is a similar project that we have led from Oxford called the China Biobank, China Kadoorie Biobank. It's 500,000 adults from a whole bunch of sites across China. So it's 500,000 people. And we've been following these people for 13 years now. So we've got a lot of data about which diseases they go on and get. So we're trying to do very similar types of things based on the heart rhythm data that we collect from these patients to make predictions about who's going to go on and get, based on their heart rhythm data, nasty conditions that you really want to detect and treat. And again, machine learning is really good for this. Machine learning is, if you're familiar with these kind of tables, what we're showing here is how well out of one, so one would be 100% of predictions for various kinds of heart diseases can we make predictions for. And some of these are getting really good. We can make predictions 80, 75% just based on the cardiac data, which is really, really very good. Bearing in mind that the patient's having these data recordings made 5 to 10 years before the nasty thing happens. So it's all about predicting and forecasting using AI. Okay, so the final thing that I'd like to show you, if I may, very quickly, just in the closing few minutes of the time I've got available, is a different project. So far we've been talking about monitoring human patients and in some cases bugs. And in the introduction, the organizer very kindly mentioned the jet engine things that we talked about, different kinds of patients we monitor jet engines. Here is another kind of patient that we like to monitor. And this is obviously not going anywhere. It's not mobile, but it's a hand pump. This is a hand pump in Kenya. Serendipitously, just by chance, that is where my father's family is from, but nothing to do with the particular project. There are hand pumps used throughout villages in low-income settings. And at any one time, 1/3 of these things are broken and don't work. So what we thought we could do is we've done jet engines where you monitor the vibrations of the jet engine and make predictions about when the jet engine is going to break. That seems to work nicely. Rolls-Royce has built that into its aircraft. Can't we do that for hand pumps? Can't we put in some sort of sensors, cheap sensors, robust sensors, into hand pumps that measure the vibrations and other things and make predictions about the health of the patient, the pump in this case? So yes, we can. So here are some of our tremendous collaborators from the School of Geography at Oxford. And this is a pod that basically holds the contents of a mobile phone. Mobile phones are pretty good computers, of course. They can transmit quite a lot of data now. And even in rural Kenya, you can get a pretty good mobile signal. So you can transmit data over the mobile network. So we insert these pods into the handles of the hand pumps, and then we monitor the health of these things. Because the goal here is to get somebody to fix the pump before the pump breaks. It's horrible if your village's pump breaks, because every village has got one. But if it breaks, what do? You've got to go to the next village to get water, which can be up to 20 kilometers, or you drink potentially unsafe groundwater, like lakes and rivers, which can very well be polluted in these areas. Water from the wells where these things are installed, from deep underground, pollution doesn't reach. So the site that I just mentioned here, this is the Kwale County in Kenya. So we work with the local government there to install these hand pumps. We also have a site here in Bangladesh. Just confusingly, the town where we do it in Bangladesh is called MATLAB. And for any engineers listening today, that is also a computer programming language. So I was very confused when our researchers said that they're going to MATLAB to collect the data. That's a place in Bangladesh, and it's also a computer language. Anyway, let's have a look at the kind of data that we get from these hand pumps. So if you're measuring data from a hand pump, you're looking at the vibrations just the way you're looking at the vibrations from a jet engine. You collect data that look like this, and it looks kind of noisy, and it varies from pump to pump. But what the researchers in this project have realized, showing up here, is that if we model the vibration characteristics of healthy pumps, then we can make predictions about the health of the hand pump, first of all. So that's very exciting. You can get somebody to fix the pump beforehand. But we also learned something else that we weren't expecting to learn. We can also predict, what I'm showing you here, we can also predict how much water is in the well, which is a really big deal for Kenya and for hot countries, because the water level sometimes disappears, and that's terrible for the village, of course. What I'm showing you here is predictions. The actual depth is in red, and using the same vibration data that we do the health monitoring, we can effectively monitor the health of the aquifer, which is the water level below the pump. This is very cool. Then a clunky pump with some cool sensors in it becomes a health monitoring system for the water aquifer beneath the country itself, which is really, really exciting. Because local governments, of course, want to encourage things like mining, and they want to encourage things like irrigation, those industries use tons of water, and it's not known if they're sucking water out of the earth for their mine or for their fields, what that's doing to village water levels. So using hand pumps to monitor the health of the water system that's in the ground is a really big deal, very exciting. So here is one of our researchers, Farah Colchester. She's gone to Kenya. She's collecting data. In fact, this is one of the prototypes. You can see it's strapped to the top of the hand pump. And it also we've got these installed in the School of Geography at Oxford. They tweet every time that they pump water, and the one in Oxford tends to pump water when students go home at night after the pub, basically. So closing time in the pubs, you get a lot of tweets from the pump as it's used outside the School of Geography. We set up a not-for-profit company called Fundi Fix. Fundi is a Swahili for mechanic, approximately, led by Professor Rob Hope and Dr. Patrick Thompson. And Fundi Fix is a company that takes, not in a not-for-profit way, it takes data from our hand pump systems and rushes out mechanics in a Land Rover to fix the pumps before they break. So based on AI, some really nice engineering, a lot of good interactions on the ground with Kenyan local government and Kenyan villages to deliver something that works for people. It's really, really exciting. And it's a good example of what AI can do for you. It's not just something that you learn in a computer science class. It's something that can help a rural village in Kenya get water. So thank you very much to my team. So these guys, postdocs and doctoral students, all who are tremendous AI researchers who've been helping to deliver this and more. If any listeners are interested, or we've got a number of positions available for postdoctoral researchers, I'd be happy to talk to you at some other time. But perhaps I could close now and say thank you ever so much for listening, even given the difficult circumstances of the current pandemic. And thanks once again to the organisers for inviting me. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you.
Caro professor David, muitíssimo obrigado pela sua palestra, por estar conosco aqui mais uma vez. Realmente, os temas que são trazidos aqui são de grande relevância, e nós recebemos diversas perguntas aqui que nós vamos ver como podemos gerenciar, porque nós já estamos aí a 12:07, não quero cansá-los mais, embora esteja muito interessante. Então, gostaria de solicitar que os nossos apresentadores voltassem à tela aí. Tá dizendo aqui que o tradutor caiu.
Okay, I'm back to I think you can hear me now. So we have several questions here that I want to forward to you from several fronts, from several participants who have sent these questions to us. There's a question from Jose Mota who says, and if you want to, any of you can answer these questions, just feel free. You work with AI in projects for controlling payment, for healthcare, as we heard here, and music, and optimizing resources and so on. All this has a very positive effect. But I'd like you to help us to reflect on something that Professor David Clifton mentioned at the beginning, which is a matter of confidentiality. Do you think that we are dealing with a possibility that AI will eventually... Oh, he's talking about the use and application of this and the ethics involved in confidentiality around the use of AI. Maybe some of you would like to comment on this. Well, I think that, of course, we can use this ethically, even in the matter of payments. We didn't have information about customers and business activities or anything of the sort in the data with news or things like that. In the past, the use of confidentiality has always been important in this system. So I think that so I believe that it is possible to work on this. Of course, this requires good data processing and a great deal of care with dealing with this data because of issues of bias and ethics and so on, because data, of course, is sensitive. And we need laws to help us regulate these things. So it will be a little harder because maybe we might have less information, but this is part of the challenge when we're working with AI. We've had so many challenges. This is just another one. Well, I think that this is present right at the beginning of research, since man started to research. So I think in understanding the universe or understanding ourselves, I think this is the mission of research. And ethics is above all a guideline, the guide for any researcher. Researchers always need to research with ethics. So if we are going into the limits of what this leads, if this deals rather to ethical issues on confidentiality and cryptography and so on, it's with the same seriousness that we've always done in doing research. Other researchers have done research in the past, being ethical, and we need to continue that. Research is anchored on ethics. A researcher in a public institution, such as the ones we work, or in companies, they have to start with the ethics. It's fundamental. After all, if we are together here as human beings, it's because we have a common mission, and this starts with ethics. Ethics is above everything else. It's not below, it's above everything. It brings us together, particularly in a moment like this. Particularly when you find people denying science, ethics is the basis of dialogue. Anyone else would like to answer?
Yeah, perhaps I can just quickly add, I think medical science particularly is very well set up for these kind of things. So medical science will not let you use a medication or a drug if it hasn't been tested and demonstrated to be safe. And it's exactly the same for models. So there are plenty of clinical models that exist. So from the minute you are born, a clinical model is producing something called an APGAR score, all the way through to end of life in an intensive care unit. Things called SAPS and Apache are other models that are being used for those kind of patients too. So clinicians, doctors are very used to and accustomed to using scores and having those scores regulated and doing studies to demonstrate that the scores correspond to what they should do, they're not biased, and they're safe. And you can just swap out the clinical model and put in a very complex machine learning, artificial intelligence model and do exactly the same kind of thing. So actually AI is a really good fit to medical science. All of that infrastructure already exists, just as Professor Gelata said. Let's continue to use it.
Well, thank you. We now have another question, which I think is also very intriguing, has a lot to do with our country as a whole. The question is, there's no doubt that AI offers many possibilities and has a great potential. But the question is, how can we deal with AI in countries like Brazil, where there is huge social inequality and wealth inequality and huge inequalities in accessing education and so on? How can we deal with this? So how can we overcome these social divides, or that using AI may not even increase these social divides or increase the number of people who are unemployed, particularly in a moment like this of this pandemic? So again, any of you, please, those who would like to answer. Well, I think it's education, isn't it? So we at IBM, we have several projects in trying to help schools. And we have units like FATEC and ATEC that bring in students from middle school. And they also help in secondary education. We also helps public schools and government-owned schools. We now have a data center to try to help people understand data science. Schools and universities that don't have their own personnel or adequate labs to deal with this, we can then offer these courses. So we know that the reality of universities in Brazil and except for the more advanced ones, other smaller universities don't have that many resources to teach these things. I once worked in a university before going to IBM. It was CEUNIS, or the Federal University of Espírito Santo, where the resources were not many. You had well-trained people, but not much in the way of machines. So we have this program in trying to help and to bring in technology or using the cloud and other IBM services to help in education, to contribute to education. So this matter of the Center for Artificial Intelligence and to take in artificial intelligence to apply to public policies and other areas, basically to help develop education. So I think that from my side, speaking of from the point of view of a private company, you need to try to democratize these things through education as much as you can. Of course, inequality is huge. In Brazil, the country is very large, and it's not possible to do everything. But if we do something, we're already helping in some way to improve the situation. So I think education would be the way to go. That would be our role. Thank you. David Clifton, Professor Johns, would you like to comment? Yes, I'd like to add to what Anna said. I think that education saves. I think that's the word. But we have to look at education in its broadest sense, not only in terms of just teaching sciences and the hard and soft sciences. We have to look at education as a way in which we can build better citizens in a country where we have huge problems. Even basic sanitation is a problem, and other inequalities. If we seek equality of knowledge and of people having access to knowledge, I think this is essential for us. So I think there are several techniques for this. I know in data, I don't have access to this like Anna has, but certainly this can help people and can bring access. It's the way how we use these things. It's not whether we have or not, but how we use these things. But we develop the devices, for instance, for people to make music with mobile phones and with the Internet of Things. So we can take this and take the teaching of music through mobiles and with the full rigor of technologies of electroacoustic music and contemporary music. Now people can have access to this. So the problem of intelligence is not the origin. The problem of intelligence is the opportunity. Intelligence is something that we build based on access, providing access. People are not born intelligent. Mozart wasn't born a genius. Neither was Einstein. What happened was a process of education and opportunity. And what we need to do is to do this. If we have technology that improves access to information, access to opportunities, I think this improves very clearly and overcomes the difficulties that we see. Professor David Clifton, would you like to comment?
Certainly. I'd also, in addition to, of course, echoing the need for education, I would also say that AI moves very slowly, and AI is actually much more boring than people think. It's actually much more routine, and progress can be quite slow, particularly on the influence on our lives. And we can see that technological advances in our societies are drip-fed slowly, naturally, and relatively well-controlled manner, such that you never really feel like you're living in the future. It's always right now. The current state of the art gradually changes. Over 10 years, you can look back and think, wow, things are very different. But on short enough timescales, it's quite easy for human societies to adapt. And I see that everywhere, from a village in Kenya all the way up to collaborators operating in a high-tech hospital in Oxford. The effect of AI is gradual, and the pace is about right for people to be able to not be afraid of it, is what I mean. It's not like the future is terrifying and it's just about to jump on us. It's already here. It's more mundane than we think. And human societies are really, really good at adapting to that. And so, as we're seeing, for example, in Fundifix, mechanics in Kenya are now consumers of AI. They're using AI. AI is integrated in the way they fix hand pumps in a village. but that wouldn't have been possible even 3 years ago. But it's natural. The human entrepreneurial drive is very, very good at exploring new platforms that become available. So I'm quite sanguine about the opportunities for AI, particularly in countries where there's a diversity of privilege and underprivilege. Certainly the same in my country as well. There's underprivileged regions where tech development has a key role to play in regenerating underprivileged areas.
Realmente essa é uma questão muito.
Yeah,
muito
this
clara,
is of course a very clear issue, isn't it?
Deve ser.
And we need to certainly take this into account. I remember, as I heard also from Professor Jauntis, my own tutor, when I was doing my PhD, Professor Weissman, she would say, we were in the 80s dealing with robotics at the time and computer vision. There was a huge competition between the major universities. And she said, look, she would say, the brain is not a prerogative for only from MITs and Berkeley. We have brains everywhere. So it's something to think about. Often we sometimes think that the great brains are just in these few centers, but the fact is that brains are everywhere. And if we provide opportunities, as we've heard, education and opportunities, and providing access, I think this is a major point that we have. Well, I have a last question. We won't go on very much longer. We're already getting to the end of our morning session, but just a question that always has to do with these debates on AI and even with industrial evolution. Certainly these questions came up. The question is, from the presentations we heard this morning, AI will revolutionize careers historically associated with human subjectiveness in fields like education, medicine, law, and psychology. So I would say, what would be the impact in arts and the letters? Should we be concerned with the consequences of the advances of AI? This has been in part answered, but how can we think and deal with these things and perceive the advances of AI? How should we look at this? There are concerns, for instance, but that Elon Musk once mentioned of where he had a somewhat ambiguous position in terms of the use of AI and the consequences. So basically this, what can we expect? What will be the true impact of AI on the human subjectivity, and particularly on careers that are often associated with the subjective view of humans, like medicine and so on? Well, I think that it's a bit cliche, but everyone needs to reinvent himself, and AI will allow people, or encourage people to reinvent themselves, ways in which we can deal with this new reality. So people will need to reinvent themselves, just like you take people who didn't have technology. So for instance, my daughter had her teacher had to learn how to teach children through the internet. I mean, she had to train herself to learn this. I think there is a bit of this as well. And again, what David said, this goes slowly. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens gradually, and people, maybe the pandemic accelerated things a little bit, but people will get used to the new technology just as much as we are getting used to smartphones and to taking pictures all the time, not having to take your pictures to be developed. And I think we're now getting used with these items within our homes to play songs or apps when we ring restaurants or whatever, or switch on lights. We're also getting used to the reality of AI forms of payment, for instance. Like I said before, you would send people physically to customers. Today, payments will be almost instantaneous. So we get used to these things gradually, and people will need to update themselves and to adapt and to stop just trusting their instincts, but learning to trust in data. Maybe we can gather these data in a better way, and also with a bit more care, a bit more care. Well, maybe I'd like to mention something based on what Anna and Dave have said, is that I think that the method that deals with the notion of intelligence, it also comes here to make us a little more humble. So I think that the idea of the creative genius, because of everything that we've heard in the history of humankind, maybe this is important, but what we're learning today with the techniques that we have is to work jointly, to work together. And I think that the move forward is for us to learn that intelligence is built collectively, and that intelligence is synergetic. So if intelligence is a synergy between people, I think that for the future, what we'll have in the creative arts will be activities where we create jointly, you create in connection, like we're already seeing. I also think that in teaching will be more decentralized with more interaction between the various parts. And also by means of these tools, maybe we can have faster exchanges and more effective exchange of concepts. The basic idea is how do we deal with concepts? And the computer has nothing more, it represents things. But how do we deal with these concepts? And from these concepts, how do we build a world and with or without computers? And of course, this is a dilemma. It's what we need. And maybe this is the next wave in humankind, which is trying to find work or developing work jointly and work in synergy. Professor David Clifton, would you like to say something?
Certainly. I'll probably confine my comments to medicine and healthcare, just simply because I'm not very good at prognosticating more widely than that. But it's certainly in healthcare. It's the case where there's a huge amount of potential. There's vast quantities of data which are being collected and can be collected, even in low resource settings. There's a lot of data that you can get these days from mobile phones, from wearables, particularly from the healthcare system itself. More data than humans can look at, more data than clinicians, experts can parse, even if they take it upon themselves to open up the patient files and look back at the trajectories of patient data. Tends to be far more than one human being can manage. So within healthcare, it's becoming more and more widely accepted that we need things to help us improve patient care using these vast resources. We've reached the limit about what a human can do, but we're not going to replace the human, because the human is the decision-making entity with vast amounts of expertise and can see far more subjective and objective data decisions than a machine can. But a machine is what is a machine good at? It's good at a complementary style of reasoning to a human. It's very good at parsing vast quantities of data very quickly, which a human being would find terribly boring or impossible. Finding correlations between variable number 2 and variable number 17 and variable number 73 that corresponds to increased risk in the future. It's really hard for a human to do that, particularly given that, as an example, one of my clinical colleagues who works in intensive care, he's one of the best clinical people in the world, and he says, I kill probably a person a month because I haven't seen their kind of data before. And he's not a bad doctor. He's one of the best doctors there is. So he sees that as an opportunity for AI, which has seen millions of patients, far more than any human can see, to provide support and say, oh, Mr. Doctor, have a look at this patient. Patients who were like this patient went on to get these kind of problems, and I think you might find the following bits of the patient data interesting. That complementary style of what would traditionally be called decision support is hugely important in healthcare, potentially elsewhere as well.
Thank you, Professor Clifton. Well, I can't resist the last question. I know we're short on time, but after that we will end. The question is, looking into the future, there is this matter that we hear, the matter of the singularity, the point in which intelligence, artificial intelligence, will effectively, or at least on principle, would be indistinguishable from human intelligence, maybe even supplanting or surpassing human intelligence. I'm not making reference to the Turing test or anything like that. None of that. But if we can identify, if, for instance, if someone on the other side of a screen or a phone, if it's a computer or a human being, the famous Turing test. Today it's the opposite. When we enter a website, the computer asks whether we are a robot or not. So we have to prove that we're humans. But the question is, how do you look into the future of artificial intelligence? Is it more a matter of conjectures or philosophy? But this matter of the singularity, how do you see this? I'd like to hear the three of you, please, if I may. I think it will grow. With such a deep question, I don't know. I think we have many problems along the way before we get to that. It will take a while. Well, I think speaking of my own area, just to say, man uses algorithms to make music, and this started from ages ago. When this started to be organized and systematized. So when we got to the 60s, when we developed the first music composition with a computer using Iliac with Hilary Isaacson, I think, well, we thought, well, what now? But at that moment, there was a matter that Iliac producing music, it produced music that will be recognized as such. Therefore, the idea of the Turing test, and reasonably well done. But what we are seeing today, which I think is important, is the use of computers as partners in creative processes. And there is, of course, a huge potential. We already use this and have used this in some areas of music now. But I think that this same use that music does in creating, in whatever name you want to give to it, this can be carried over to science. So, for instance, soon after, when LIGO identified gravitational waves, one of the things that was done was to put sound to it, to put sound to the gravitational waves of LIGO. So, for instance, using mechanisms like sonification in science fiction films, for instance, or data mining, well, or sounds, this can provide tools for us to expand the way in which we analyze these things. So, not only using bidimensional charts that we are used to using today. So, in the interaction of sensors with artificial intelligence and interaction with representation, I think that we can really learn a lot. When we have the excessive amount of data, you don't know how to deal with all representations. Maybe a way of dealing with this is to make high-level representations that will use interaction with sound and image or other multimodal versions. I see this frequently in my own area. I think this is a very efficient application that can help not only in producing works of art, like we do here, but also helping in other areas, for instance, for others to look at these processes and to see these things and to analyze. What we need is to expand awareness, basically. Professor Glave.
I think it's a fantastic question, a very playful question. As the first speaker mentioned, I think we're a long way away. I think based on the fact that we're doing machine learning on piles of graphics cards, which were originally used to play computer games, I don't think we're too close to the kind of thing that you're talking about. We would need a completely different hardware system for being able to do compute. Whether that's quantum computing or not, I don't know, but clearly we are a long way away from even the hardware that can allow us to think about those questions. I think, let's suppose we had the hardware. I think we're children playing with technologies that we haven't quite worked out the ramifications to yet. We're seeing society react to things it doesn't understand, such as self-driving cars, etc. And we're feeling our way around these new technologies as they enter our lives. Is it okay for a car to run someone over, when it's driven by an AI? Is it okay for 20,000 cars to run people over because the drivers are drunk on UK streets every year, or whatever the number is? So I think we are very naive as a society simply because we haven't had the experience of these systems. As that's going to change, isn't it, over coming years? So it's a watching brief, I would say.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much. These are issues that, that are difficult to deal with. Even issues that have to do with law, such as autonomous vehicles. If someone is run over, who's in charge of that? Who's responsible? Is it the car itself? So there are many issues that need to be solved, need to be developed. Well, we get to the end then of this meeting, and I'd like to thank immensely each one and every one of you. Anna Paula, Professor John, Professor David Clifton, thank you very much for your excellent talks. And in fact, I think this has given us a lot of food for thought, a lot for us to think about. And many questions will be dealt with as we go along this week. This afternoon, we will have a specific talk about emulation environments. These are important issues, particularly for the various universities that try to have their discoveries actually being conveyed in a more agile manner. Tomorrow morning, a talk about the future of science and technology in Brazil. And after that at night, a talk of the UFMG talks about the Center of Artificial Intelligence that UFMG will work with in healthcare. So obviously, there are other interesting talks as we go on, so I'd like to invite all of you to be with us, stay connected, connect into the site, visit the site, and I wish you all a very interesting week in this event. So thank you all very much, and good afternoon. Thank you, all of you, and also for interpretation by David Johnson, who did this, and all of us who were with us, and the folks at CAC and others. Thank you all very much. Good afternoon once again, and see you next time.